Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist and I run a business that enables me to bring knowledge and learning to everyone, not just those who are studying at colleges and universities. And I do this by producing a range of blogs, vlogs and free online courses. But I do also run slightly more in-depth courses which are available both face-to-face and online, obviously when we're not locked down face-to-face. You don't need any previous qualifications to learn with me, and there are a range of courses available. So once you finish this video, why not head over to my website and have a look at the range of courses that there are. A few of my followers recommended that I do a psychological analysis of Joe Exotic, who's recently appeared in a popular documentary on Netflix. The Tiger King has been an incredibly popular show on Netflix, and it's really unsurprising because it's full of really big characters with so many things going on within themselves and between each other. When I initially considered doing this analysis, I wasn't sure whether I could do it in one short video because there's just so much material to go on. Therefore, I just want to spend this first few minutes talking about which aspects I am going to be talking about and which aspects I'm not going to cover. Before I do go on and talk anymore, if you haven't seen The Tiger King and you intend to watch it, go and watch it first because this video will contain some spoilers and I don't want to ruin anything for you because it is a really good series. Along with requests to talk about Joe, I was asked if I thought that Carole Baskin killed her husband or not. There's no evidence to suggest that she did kill her husband. She's never been arrested. She's never been charged or convicted of killing him. Therefore, from a legal point of view, it would be fairly irresponsible of me to say whether or not I think that she did it. Joe Exotic was convicted of 2 counts of attempting to hire somebody to murder Carole Baskin, as well as 8 violations in wildlife trading laws and 9 violations of the Endangered Species Act. The next important thing to talk about is the very nature of these real-life documentaries. Although they are based on facts, these are made for entertainment purposes. The directors and producers will already have an agenda that they'll want to follow. Sometimes they can and do make people appear to be more innocent than what they actually are, or obviously they can make them look more guilty than what they are. If you cast your minds back to another Netflix show which was quite popular called Making a Murderer, we heard of Steven Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey, and they were convicted of murder, and the show documents their investigation, arrest and conviction. After that series was shown, the general public were outraged by the conviction and many people showed their support for the pair. However, as with many other documentaries of this kind, the series leads the viewers to the conclusion that Avery was framed by the police. But we now know that the filmmakers minimised or left out many aspects of Steven Avery's past, including multiple alleged incidents of physical and sexual violence. And they also omitted important evidence against him, which included DNA evidence. But we all love this type of documentary, and I'm including myself in that. I really enjoy it. We're led through facts during the documentary and we're subconsciously drawn to the conclusions that the producers want us to arrive at. As much as I enjoy these shows, we also need to keep in mind that these are real life crimes with real victims. People have lost their lives, families have suffered a great deal. So we do need to be a little bit cautious about the conclusions that we draw when we watch them. I'm going to be taking a look at Joe Exotic's background and his behaviour. I will be making some comments on some of the relevant psychological aspects to that behaviour. As with all of the different analyses that I've done, I begin by talking about the subject's upbringing and their background. There's normally always events that are worthy of note in a person's past. However, the more of these analysis videos that I do, the more I feel it's really important to highlight that any tragic events themselves don't create an offender and they don't justify their behaviour. I'm sure I could take a random set of 100 non-criminal participants and find some traumatic event in the past lives of probably about half of them. Not everyone who suffers a traumatic event will go on to become an offender. Joe Exotic's original surname is Schreiberville. I'm not even sure because I can't say it, but he changed his name many times over the years. He was a middle child and he grew up on a farm around many animals. The New York Times reported that he often felt that his cold German parents viewed him as a source of farm labour rather than as a child. He recalled that no one in his family ever said, "I love you" to each other. When he was 5 years old, he says he was repeatedly raped by an older boy, and this happened in the family home. He vividly recalled how a drawer in the bathroom could be opened to wedge the door shut. Having cold parents can sometimes mean that children don't learn to form emotional attachments with others. Being raped at a young age will have caused a great deal of trauma and a great deal of mistrust for people. However, rather than not forming any type of close attachment or trust, he appeared to form really close bonds with animals. Joe was always an animal lover from a really young age. He looked after the animals on the family's farms, as well as keeping pigeons and taking in raccoons and squirrels. He would sometimes take his BB gun out and shoot sparrows. He'd then go and collect used medicine bottles that were used from treating the family's cows and fill them with coloured water so that he could nurse or doctor the birds back to health. Although the majority of his behaviour towards animals was caring, it shows a need for control. In order to so-called help some of these animals, he had to hurt them first. He is likely to have felt fairly controlled by his parents. He will have felt a great deal of resentment because of this. He's also likely to have felt resentment towards the rapist. Throughout his childhood, there is evidence of him mirroring this type of control, but only his was over animals. There are reports of several events during his life that Joe himself has told the media. Some of these events, though, are not recalled by other people. For example, he said that he sprinkled nails on a parking lot to pop the tyres of some old schoolboys' cars who were bullying him. However, those who knew him at the time, including the principal of that school, don't recall this ever happening. Joe told the media that he had to get a job to pay for all the tyres, and he later recalled, "But they never effed with me again. Never." He worked as a police chief in a small town. He became depressed and he tried to commit suicide by crashing his car. Joe's family and the residents of the town don't remember this event taking place. Joe told the press that he ended up in hospital with a broken back and spent 57 days in traction in the hospital. And then he moved down to Florida for what he said to participate in experimental saltwater rehabilitation program. However, his boyfriend at the time only remembers a broken shoulder and says that the only saltwater rehabilitation was him going snorkeling. This suggests to me that Joe likes to place himself as the underdog who overcame the odds. He wants people to think of him as being stronger and better than everybody else because he beat the odds in such dramatic ways. It was in Florida that he became friends with a man called Tim, who owned a pet store. And Tim's friend worked at a safari. And it meant that Tim would bring home baby lions to be nursed, which Joe absolutely fell in love with. And that started his love for the big cats. He did eventually go on to purchase a plot of land, and he used money that the family had received after his brother had died in a car accident. There are many, many more details of his life available because he's such an exhibitionist. He had an internet show which had quite a good following. He saw himself as a minor celebrity. He portrayed himself as an ambassador for big cats, and he called his roadside zoo a sanctuary. Before The Tiger King came out on Netflix, he appeared in a Louis Theroux programme. There's one part of that programme which shows them talking near a lion's cage, and Joe tells Louis that if he was in there with the lion, that the lion wouldn't eat Louis, but it would play with him. Joe went on to say that he would just shoot Louis in the head as it would be kinder. You can actually see how much Joe enjoys the reactions that he gets. He just loves causing a reaction in people, and it doesn't matter whether it's a good reaction, such as the joy of playing with and petting a young tiger cub, or a bad reaction of shock and disgust when he tells people that he'd shoot them. So far, to me, he comes across as being a narcissist. He's full of self-importance. He wants the admiration of others. He'll lie to get it. He wants to have control. He manipulates people. He has a lack of empathy towards people. Joe wanted power and success. He wants and needs to be admired by others. He's a very arrogant person and believes that he's superior to others. And this was glaringly obvious when he decided that he was going to run for president. Joe also comes across as being fairly childlike. And what I mean by this is that he doesn't hold himself accountable for his own actions. He seeks to blame other people and situations for the difficulties that he's had. And this is what led to the feud between him and Carole Baskin. At some points in the documentary, it almost feels like children quarrelling over toys or quarrelling over who's right and wrong. Each of them is in their corner, pointing their finger, saying, "You're bad, you did this," and the other one is in the other corner shouting back, "Yeah, well, you did this." When you consider the behaviour of all of the people in that show, all of them are at fault in one way or another. When he first opened the animal park, Joe was opposed to breeding tigers, and he'd frequently lecture his guests on it. However, when he discovered how lucrative it was, his views evolved, as did his business. He became very skilled at breeding cubs and keeping them alive. Eventually, Joe would become, by his own estimation, the largest breeder of tigers in the country, and he was very proud of that claim. He came to see himself as preserving the species. Captivity, he used to say, is the only hope. He would say that the wilderness keeps on shrinking, that poachers keep on poaching these big cats. But he also bred lions and tigers together and created several types of hybrid big cats. He even claimed that he was able to recreate the prehistoric saber-toothed tiger. But big cat biologists suggest that this is an absolutely absurd claim. And this brings me back to the narcissistic trait of feelings of grandiose and a high sense of self-importance. Joe had several husbands. His first died of complications associated with HIV. The second one was violent and once held a gun to Joe's head, and that husband is subsequently serving a life sentence in prison for murder. After that, Joe was attracted to young heterosexual men. Again, this is likely to be as a result of wanting power and control. Younger men were perhaps more easily impressed by his particular style and the fact that he owned and controlled lots of big cats. In the documentary, we see that Joe marries two men at once. All three of them sleep together, and on the surface, initially, it appears that they have a good relationship. However, it isn't long before you start to think that the youngest man, Travis, is being used. However, he stayed in the relationship with Jo, one, because it was an easy life, and two, he was kept with a good supply of drugs. Travis is the one who sadly killed himself in the accident on the show. Travis's mum also lived at the park and remained involved with Jo after her son's death. And this is most likely to be because she was being kept with a constant supply of drugs as well. The other husband was called John. Jo paid for a tattoo for John, which said privately owned by Jo Exotic. With the two men, it was an ownership for Jo rather than a loving relationship. John ended up leaving the relationship for a woman and went on to have a child with her. Jo was fairly promiscuous. All of the men in his life and most of his employees came from rough or difficult backgrounds. Jo believed that he was helping them and giving them a second chance, and for some of them it was a final chance, which seems lovely, but it was more about power and control for Jo. He enjoyed having the ability to run people's lives and demand whatever he wanted from them. These types of behaviours lead me to think that it's possible that Jo also has some traits of something called histrionic personality disorder. And this is characterised by a pattern of excessive attention-seeking behaviours. Usually, it begins in early childhood and it can include inappropriate seduction and an excessive need for approval. People who are diagnosed with this disorder are said to be lively, dramatic, vivacious, enthusiastic and flirtatious. And this describes Jo Exotic very well, in fact, almost perfectly. I couldn't possibly do a video of Jo Exotic without a mention of his wonderful music videos. They're over the top, they're outrageous, and they're fun videos, which he himself has circulated. However, it doesn't take much digging around to discover that it isn't even him singing on the videos. Yet he still took the praise and claimed that it was him singing. This is just more approval and attention-seeking behaviour from Jo. Carole Baskin was Jo's primary target for a long time, but she had more money than him and more followers. She spoke out publicly against him and his practices, and Jo retaliated. Carole's husband had gone missing and was presumed dead some years ago. Jo believed that she fed him to her tigers. Because of the animosity between them, Jo went to some very extreme lengths to get back at her, which led him to have to go to court several times. And it was because of the threats to kill Carole Baskin that he's now in prison. As I said earlier, Jo Exotic was convicted of 2 counts of attempted to hire somebody to murder Carole Baskin. Also convicted of 8 violations in wildlife trading laws and 9 violations of the Endangered Species Act. He was sentenced to 22 years imprisonment. In conclusion, in my opinion, Jo Exotic is a narcissist who also displays some signs of histrionic personality disorder. He consistently craves attention and approval from others. He's sexually promiscuous and is attracted to those that he believes he will be able to have power and control over. He doesn't take any responsibility for his actions and is always blaming it on somebody else to paint himself as the victim in it all. Don't get me wrong, he has some really lovable qualities and the general public have shown a great deal of fondness for him. He's charming, he's outgoing, he's flamboyant, and he did appear to really care for these animals initially. However, over the years, he became misguided and greedy. Money and social standing became more important to him than the welfare of the animals. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video and found it interesting. If you did enjoy it, it would be really helpful if you could leave it a thumbs up. Maybe you could leave me a comment and let me know what you think of Joe Exotic. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Bye for now.